Nikola Jokic might be the greatest offensive big in NBA history, but here's the wild part. He was drafted 41st in the second round. Even crazier, the shocking reason he almost stayed in Europe instead of coming to the NBA. As an NBA scout, I'll uncover why Jokic fell to the 41st pick of the 2014 draft and the unbelievable story of how he finally signed with Denver. This is a journey you won't believe. I'm Anthony Goods, the Stanford gentleman turned NBA scout, and I appreciate y'all for watching. Please take a second to like and subscribe, and I'll keep bringing you more insider videos like this. There's a stat floating around that Denver has the highest rated offense in NBA history when Nikola Jokic is on the floor. Let that sink in. In an era dominated by super teams, the best offense ever belongs to this Nuggets team led by a second-round pick. How did so many NBA front offices miss out on Jokic, letting him fall all the way to 41? The NBA moves and trends, and back in 2014, Denver's situation was unique. JaVale McGee's season had ended with a stress fracture in his tibia, leaving their front line thin. Their only true center at the time was Timofey Mozgov. During the draft, the Nuggets trade the number 11th pick for the 16th and 19th pick, selecting Jusuf Nurkic and Gary Harris. Hindsight is always 20/20, but it's easy to wonder why they didn't grab Jokic at 19. Fast forward to the second round, Jokic gets selected at 41 during a commercial break. Denver then decides to stash him in Serbia for another year, which was a decision that nearly cost them their future MVP. Let's unpack why the Nuggets prioritized Nurkic over Jokic in the draft. Nurkic was seen as a defensive anchor fitting the mold of the league's top centers at the time. Big, physical, and dominant defensively. The reality is, drafting two developmental centers in the first round probably felt excessive, especially with Mozgov already on the roster. Draft. You see Joakim Noah and Rudy Gobert and Andre Drummond. All of these guys are defensive bigs, known for their rebounding, defensive pick-and-roll play, or even their shot blocking. In contrast, Jokic's game was harder to categorize. Jokic was playing for Mega, a Serbian team focused on development, similar to the G League Ignite program, but in Europe. His stats during his draft year were modest at best. He averaged 11 points, shot just 22% from three, and added 6 rebounds and 2 assists in 25 minutes per game. Nothing about those numbers jump off the page, and realistically, if we removed his name off of those stats, a lot of us would likely stash a player with this profile as well. But stats don't always tell the whole story. Jokic was already recognized as the best passing big in the draft, though his production raised concerns. I spoke with Charles Jenkins, a former Golden State Warrior who played against Jokic in Serbia during that time. He shed light on why Jokic's stats didn't reflect his true potential.
The first year, he was his game was kind of the same, but his team had a lot better players the first time. So they had Vasa Micic that plays for Efes. He was a starting point guard, and he was like the next guard up. And he also had an older center, like a veteran leader around him.
As Jenkins explained, Jokic played behind an older player and on a team centered around another prospect, Vasily Micic, who is now playing with the Charlotte Hornets. This dynamic limited Jokic's touches and opportunities, a common scenario in Europe and even in college basketball. During his stash year, Jokic exploded. He improved his three-point shooting from 22% to 35%. His assist numbers climbed, and he looked far more polished. If he was the best passing big in the draft the year before, averaging 2 assists per game, he looked twice as good facilitating the next season. Before we dive further into Jokic's game, let me tell you that testing my skills with PrizePicks this football season is the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. If you add a skill, you could turn $10 into $1,000 in just a few taps. This week on PrizePicks, I'm picking Caleb Williams to throw less than 230 yards and Patrick Mahomes to throw over 260 yards. If both of these hit, I can win 3 times my investment. Simple, easy, and it makes NFL Sunday a little more fun. Go to prizepicks.com/agoods24 and use promo code agoods24 for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/agoods24. Daily fantasy sports made easy. Nuggets president at the time, Tim Connelly, later said, "We thought about past drafts of teams that missed out on guys like him. Marc Gasol wasn't exactly Adonis. When he was selected in the second round, he turned into a great player. So all of these things come into play, and then you say, well, he's an elite passer and he's got a great feel for the game. But here's the wild twist. Jokic almost never came to the NBA because FC Barcelona, one of the biggest teams in Europe, had a deal in place to sign him during his stash year. If that deal would have gone through, it might have closed the door to the NBA at least for several years. Here's why this was so critical. When a player is stashed in Europe, the NBA team that owns their rights usually has to pay a buyout to bring them over. For smaller teams like Mega, where Jokic was playing, buyouts are relatively manageable. But when a player signs with a powerhouse like FC Barcelona, the stakes skyrocket. Big European clubs often include hefty buyout clauses in their contracts, sometimes millions of dollars. For NBA teams, paying those buyouts on top of a rookie contract isn't always worth it, especially for a second-round pick like Jokic. And there have even been scenarios where players will pay a portion of the buyout themselves if the NBA team doesn't want to pay the buyout in full. If Jokic had signed with Barcelona, Denver might have been forced to delay bringing him to the NBA, or worse, might not have brought him over at all. Now here's where it gets crazy. Jokic's deal with Barcelona was practically done, but when their representatives came to sign him and watch him play, he had the worst game of his career. According to his agent, it was an off night that Jokic would probably like to forget, but it ended up being a blessing in disguise. The deal fell apart, keeping Jokic on Denver's radar and paving the way for him to join the NBA in 2015. This one bad game could have been the luckiest break in Nuggets history. If Jokic had signed with Barcelona, his buyout could have priced Denver out and delayed his arrival to the NBA for years. Instead, fate kept him on track to be the MVP that we know him as today. By the summer of 2015 in Denver, things had shifted. Mike Malone was the new head coach, Mozgov had been traded to Cleveland, and Nurkic was recovering from a torn patella tendon. Nurkic's extended recovery created a window for Jokic, who arrived ready to prove himself. But it makes you wonder, if Nurkic had stayed healthy, would Denver have even brought him in 2015? Or would Jokic have become this EuroLeague star, and like many other great European players, he would have stayed in Europe because he was comfortable or making too much money? It's crazy how something can happen in one day that affects history for years.
Jusuf's contract was coming up in about a year, and so we were having our analytics group run all the different numbers of how to compare the two and what to look for, and all of a sudden this comparison comes through. And fortunately, we had enough data at the time to be able to really put together per 36 minutes and compare different things. And so this comparison comes through, and it's player A and player B. And it was they're in their second season, and the only difference of the two is that player A is 2 years older than player B at the time of their second year in the NBA. Player A just entered the league later. And you could clearly see that player B's numbers were better in really every category. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna guess that player B is Nikola. And they're like, yep, you're right, player B is Nikola. And I'm like, all right, well then who are we talking about with player A? Is this some sort of comparison with Nurk, or is this some sort of comparison with someone else in the league? And they're like, player A is Larry Bird.
Looking back, Jokic being drafted at 41 is kind of absurd, but it kind of made sense because that draft had a lot of talent. His body, defensive concerns, and low production raised legitimate concerns. By 2015, though, he was a completely different prospect. Another crazy fact is just 10 days before the NBA draft, Jokic's agent announced that Jokic was pulling out of the draft. It took a promise from the Denver Nuggets that they would draft him at 41 for Jokic to put his name in the draft. And the rest is history. Credit to the Denver Nuggets for recognizing his potential and crafting a development plan that would allow him to grow into the generational talent that he is today. But that's all I got for y'all. I appreciate y'all taking the time to watch this video. Please take another second to like and subscribe, and I'm going to keep more heat coming y'all way. And as always, keep shooting, and I'll keep scouting.